Today's webinar, Certification for Forest Owners, is made possible through Forestry and Natural Resource Webinars, a partnership with the North Carolina State University Cooperative Extension, Southern Regional Extension Forestry, and the Texas A&M Forest Service. I'd like to introduce today's speaker, Jeff Stringer. Jeff is a professor of hardwood silviculture and forest operations at the University of Kentucky Department of Forestry. Dr. Stringer specializes in hardwood silviculture, forest operations, and best management practices. His work includes research in his areas of specialization and the development of continuing education programs for forest owners, forestry, and natural resource professionals. He is currently director of the Kentucky Master Logger Program and editor of the Kentucky Log Jam newsletter. Jeff?
Yeah, it's great to be here today, and we're going to spend a few minutes talking about the certification for forest owners. It provides a little bit of an introduction to that, and we hope everybody by the time we come out of here has a good understanding of how certification works here in the U.S. for forest owners, and particularly family forest owners. So let's talk about forest certification. When we use the word forest, we're using it to describe all sizes, whether it's a 10-acre woodlands or a 10,000-acre forest. So don't let that word forest bother you. Some people it does, but in this case of certification, it entails all acreages. And ultimately, forest certification means that the forest or the woodlands are being grown or managed with a plan that contains all the standards of a recognized certification system. And so we're going to talk about these different certification systems as we go through the presentation. Now, there's a term called wood certification, and that simply means that there's wood or wood products that are made from timber grown in a certified forest. So this term wood certification is a general one that's used to describe this situation where industries are producing a certified product, and ultimately, of course, that's linked to the forest because you have to have that material grown in a certified forest. And we'll talk about those linkages a little later. Now, certification is not a new issue in the U.S., and I use these three examples right here: Underwriters Library, U of L, stamp. If you see that, that means that product has been made to a set of standards. In this case, it deals with grounding the electrical components of the product, so when you plug your toaster in, it doesn't kill you. So we all understand that the U of L sticker means something. It means that the product was designed and manufactured to a set of standards. USDA prime grade beef and that kind of thing. And then we have the Motion Picture Association. Again, we have different ratings there, and in the U.S. we all understand that if something's rated with a G, what that means. It means that movie was produced in a manner that met a certain standards for a G rating. So we use this issue of certification, and we've used it for a long time here in the U.S. So it's not a new concept to us. Now, ultimately, the combination of the forest certification. So we're going to be talking about how to certify forests and the different types of forest certification systems there are. But the combination of that and the wood certification is a market solution. So it's a voluntary market solution that ensures sustainability of the forest. And so the whole idea is to be able to produce wood products that have that are certified and carry a certified label with them, and that indicates that the wood that went into those products came from a sustainable situation. Now, forest certification means the forests are managed for sustainability. All of our standards for certification, all the certification systems, all provide for sustainability. And so that means that all the operations that are done on the property, whether it's timber harvesting or pesticide use, TSI, prescribed fire, etc., are done that it deals with these different elements that are shown in this slide. The environment was protected, so there were practices in place to make sure that all aspects of the environment were protected while those operations were going on. That you're able to sustainably produce timber and fiber over the long haul and enhance wildlife, and things were done safely, and protection of special sites, all those kind of things. So in today's situation we have with forest certification, any of those standards are going to encompass and ensure sustainability with all these different issues. So one of the questions that often gets asked is, what's the difference between managing well and having a well-managed forest or well-managed woodlands versus being certified? And it's a really good question. okay? Because ultimately certification simply means that you're proving through a third-party audit that you're doing what you say you're doing. You can have a great management plan. You can be the greatest woodland owner, the greatest forest manager in the world, and your forest is maintained at a really high standard. But if you're not certified, you don't have an easy way of proving that. So all certification does is prove that you're doing the right thing. And that's got to be done through a third party, and we'll talk about that here in a minute, but it's got to be done through an unbiased auditing or inspection of your property. And that's what makes the difference between a certified forest and ultimately an uncertified one. So the difference between managing well and being certified, you have to prove that your forest management is being done to a set of standards. Now let's talk about the legitimacy of the different systems here for a minute. We mentioned third party a minute ago, so let's just explain what all that means. Well, there's what we call first, second, and third party development of the standards and auditing and that kind of thing. And the best way to explain is just go through an example. If we had a first party system, that means Bob Smith owns the Woodlands. He develops a set of management standards or a set of certification standards, Bob Smith certification standards. And he's developed them himself, and he audits himself and checks himself to make sure that it's done correctly. And he tells the world that I have a Bob Smith certification system, and I audit it myself, and everything's good. Well, as you might imagine, I mean, Bob Smith could be the greatest forest manager in the world, but that has zero credibility in the market or with most groups. And I think everybody would agree with that. So the second party is you have an organization. Tree Farm is a good example of this. So Tree Farm system and is developed from a set of woodland owners and forest owners that are in this organization. That organization has standards. That's a second party system, if you will. Okay. And Tree Farm could go out and inspect itself, which, as a matter of fact, it has done for years. That's what Tree Farm inspectors are. So they have gone out and they've audited, if you will, in certification terms, or inspected in Tree Farm terminology. Periodically, the inspectors will go out and do that for a tree farm. So they've had a second party system that was second party developed and second party audited. Okay. So what's third party mean? Well, that means that the standards of the auditing was done by an organization that was not directly involved in the ownership. So this would be a total third party, no bias, no financial relationships, that kind of thing. So you can have a situation where a third party, an organization comes together, if you will, of disinterested people from the standpoint they don't own forest land, and they can develop a system, okay? And then you can have third-party auditing, where you have a separate auditor that has no financial relationship to the system, would come out and audit for. And so legitimacy in the market, and legitimacy as far as certification systems now goes, requires a third-party audit. You have to have a disinterested party come out and certify what is going on in your woodlands. And that's the level of legitimacy that's required right now. Now, we talked about these different standards going on, development, and we'll talk more in detail about all of them here in a minute, but you're going to see when we talk about them that there's going to be a difference in the standards based on the organization that's developed them. And these differences come about due to the policies or positions, if you will, of the organization on sustainability. One organization may have a certain things they emphasize and are worried about, and that's how they define sustainability based on their policies or concerns. And then it also makes a difference whether your organization, the geographical scope of your organization, and the political scope as well. We'll talk more about that here in a minute. Now, ultimately, the differences in the standards that we're fixing to talk about, these differences reflect how the organizations define sustainability, because we all would define that differently. If each one of us that we're in this program today were asked to provide a definition of sustainability, everybody's would be a little bit different. They'd all have the same general idea, but everybody would emphasize different things and have a slightly different idea. So the difference in the standards reflect how the organizations define sustainability and their disposition to different components. So everybody will emphasize, every standard will emphasize certain things and de-emphasize others. And we'll show examples of that here in a minute. So what does sustainability include and what's emphasized? Well, I've got a list here, And if you look down through it, like the forest ability to sustainably provide timber and non-timber forest products. So that everybody agrees that if you're going to be managing a forest, and whether it's a small woodlands or a giant forest, that you ought to be able to sustainably provide products from it. The second bullet there is to protect special species and sites. Well, everybody agrees that you need to be protecting rare, threatened, and endangered species. That's the law. But you also ought to be protecting archaeological sites, historical sites. Nobody's going to disagree with that. Provide for social sustainability. Now, this is something that's kind of new. 30, 40 years ago, this issue of a social conscience for forest management, it was there, but it wasn't in writing, so to speak. And now there are protections for social sustainability, protecting local communities, local economic development that have eked into the different standards. And then the last three there, protect the overall environment, ecosystem function. Obviously, nobody wants to be doing something in their forest management that kills the ecosystem. So everybody would look at this list and say, yeah, I agree with all those things. Forest management and standards of certification ought to encompass all these things. Nobody's going to argue that. The difference in the system becomes as to what they emphasize. Okay? Now, before we get into the details of the systems, let's just talk about where this whole forest certification thing came from. Well, there's interest in certification, all kinds of different levels. Corporations, architects, and society in general would like to see more certified product being used. Okay, and we'll talk about why here in a minute. Secondary industries. So these are industries that build furniture and cabinet manufacturing, flooring, and all that kind of stuff. Well, they have clients that are requesting certified material or certified products. So they're interested in certification. And then, of course, you have the primary industry, sawmills, pulp mills, that kind of thing, that are providing the material for the secondary industry. And so they have orders that come in for certified lumber, paper, and that kind of thing. So all phases of the industry here, from the final users and the secondary and the primary industries, have some degree of interest in certification. We'll talk more about that later, a later time. But they all have this, and this obviously rolls down then ultimately to trying to provide a timber source for the material that goes into these different industries. So why is this concern going on? Well, ultimately it's because society wants to know that everything's being done in an environmentally and socially sound manner. Generally speaking, the society wants to know that everything's being done okay. And certification is a way of providing that. Now, modern certification, as we know it now, was developed in response to environmental activists. And so this initially really got ramped up in Europe. They were protesting illegal logging and logging going on, and logs coming in from, for example, from the Brazilian rainforest. And it was from that environmental concern voiced through activist organizations and other NGOs that kind of initiated the current wave of certification activity. Now, when the environmental activists started, they'd spike trees to keep them from being cut down, and they'd strap themselves to trees, for example, out in the Pacific Northwest, or go camp out in the tops of ones for a number of years and that kind of thing, and just to stop logging. And so that got a little bit of airplay, and it got them a little bit of attention. But ultimately it didn't give them the attention they wanted. So they shifted their strategy to actually attacking the boardroom and trying to attack brand reputation from the end users. So the activists switched from protesting in the forest and started protesting against the boardrooms and retailers. And you see here, this is a Rainforest Action Network banner, not hanging up from a old growth redwood tree, but hanging off a corporate building. And so when that kind of thing starts happening, the people that govern these companies and the board of directors, that kind of thing, pay attention to it. And one example of that is what happened with Home Depot. So Home Depot got targeted by RAN, which is Rainforest Action Network, and the environmental activists group worried about forest issues. And they went in there and they started actually doing this type of demonstration. See the pictures here at different home improvement stores. And they ramped this up over several years. And if you've got that going on, the controlling interests of Home Depot are watching this. They're concerned about it. And ultimately they decided, and maybe not just because of this, but certainly something like this would motivate you to action from a brand reputation standpoint. And they developed a commitment to buy certified. And now I'm picking on Home Depot here, but other companies have been targeted like this. Companies that make catalogs that use lots of paper and sending out large catalogs and that kind of thing. Other big box elements and stores and that kind of thing. So it wasn't just Home Depot, but they're probably one of the most widely known situations we have. And so what does this mean? Well, I was in a walked in my local Home Depot, and there's a load of 2x4, some pallets of 2x4 studs there. And you see some black stamps on those studs, and I'll pull a close-up here. And so this shows you that, you know, on those stamps, of course, there's a white Domtar sticker there. So those Domtar is a company that at the time they had a division of the company that made dimensional stock. That's no longer the case, but this time it was made by them. But you see the FSC logo right there, a little tree over it. So that's Forest Stewardship Council. It means this is a certified wood product. There's a certification number there. All those 2x4s are stamped with that. So what this tells you is this is a response to Home Depot indicating they have a preference for when they can get it to handle and sell certified wood product, and this is how you see that playing out at your local store. So certification then helps industries and businesses, and they usually it manifests itself through having policies that indicate preference for certified products. Okay, and that indicates to the concerned public that they are doing their part to help protect the forest. So by having a preference for certified material, it indicates that, hey, that we care about the environment, we care about what's going on in the forest, and we buy certified when we can. Now for forest owners, they're not as worried about their brand. Most of us, and family forest owners, aren't worried about your brand, so to speak. But it does provide, and certification can provide, an acceptable method of proving that you're doing good management. So forest certification can help large landowners providing market opportunities for timber and pulpwood. And there's some large land ownerships that use certification for this purpose. Now, woodland owners or family forest owners, NRPF owners, which of course are hugely important here in the eastern U.S. You know, in some instances, in some places, it can provide improvement in timber and pulpwood markets and provide a market preference, and that does happen. And it can provide increased assistance and oversight, and that is it can be a very positive thing for some woodland owners, and certification can provide that. For example, a tree farm system has always had inspectors that go out and inspect on a periodic basis, and that still continues. But with certification, it ramps that issue up in the frequency that things have to be inspected and that kind of thing. So it puts more emphasis on that part of it, and that relates to better technical assistance in the end, or it can. So let's talk about different types of certification. In the certification game, there's what we call FM, or Forest Management Certification, and that's what most of us think about when we think about forest certifications. Getting a particular piece of land certified, that's called FM certification. Now, industries also have to get certified to produce a certified wood product, and that type of certification is called Chain of Custody, or COC for short. So when wood industries are certified, it's done with what's called a Chain of Custody certificate. And there's also logging certification, and we won't spend much time on that, but that's called a point of harvest certification system, where we're actually certifying the logging firm that the logging operation is being done. Okay, so we have all these different types, and mainly we're going to focus on the FM, or Forest Management Certification today. And so before we get into talking about the individual systems, there's some basic premises here that if you look at it, they will help define and help you understand why these different certification systems have the differences that they do. And so let's look at forest certification systems from the standpoint of being a real simple system to being a very complex one. Okay, now, if you're trying to develop a forest certification system that encompasses the globe, that it will encompass every forest type on the planet, from tundra to rainforest, you know, and all the different continents, the chances are that forest management system might be more complex than if you were developing a system for a country or a region or a county. Okay, a county might have like 1 or 2 forest types in it, so it'd be pretty easy to build a system that would encompass that. So the larger geographic area you span, the more complex your system is going to be. If your system allows for expert opinion to be used, the forester can, in this case, the forester can use his best judgment to determine this, that, and the other thing. That versus one that gets very prescriptive. They're trying to tell you what to do for every little thing. Well, a system trying to tell you what to do with every little thing is going to be more complex, necessarily, than one that's going to allow for a lot of expert opinion based. And then, this is something we don't think a lot about in the U.S., but it makes sense if you do. If you've got a legal structure that's enforced in a country, so you've got laws and regulations that are being enforced, they will the chances are those laws will cover a number of aspects that are important to certification. For example, pesticide use. In the U.S., we have the EPA, we have labeling of pesticides, we have certification of applicators, all that kind of stuff. So we have a structure that helps to ensure the proper use of chemicals. Well, if you had a country that didn't have that, then you could have improper chemical use real easy. So if you've got a functional legal structure in place versus a non-functional one, if you're trying to develop a system, a forest certification system for a non-functional legal situation, then your forest management system is going to be more, certification system is going to be more complex. If you can rely upon the laws, that takes some complexity out of the system. And then, of course, if it's going to be a third-party system, developed from third-party inputs and all these concerns from all these different stakeholders, that's liable to be more complex than if you developed a first or second-party system. So this little graphic here will explain to you some of the differences that we have in the four certification systems that we're ready to go over. Okay. Now, so let's talk about FM systems here in the U.S. that are prevalent. American Tree Farm is the biggest one. We'll deal with it in a little bit more detail here, but it's primarily for family or privately owned forests. That's the way it started out. It started out as a recognition program, and now it's a certification system, and we'll talk about why that is and how that works here in a minute. But American Tree Farm is the largest and most well-known. There's something called Sustainable Forestry Initiative, or SFI. This is an industry-based program developed primarily for industrial forests in the North America, and it was initiated by the American Forest and Paper Association. So these are large forest industries and wood industries here in the U.S., and they developed a system of certification for their forest. And that's called SFI. And then you have Forest Stewardship Council, or FSC for short. This was developed for all types of forests. It's internationally recognized. It's a global system. So the other two, obviously American Tree Farms here in the U.S., SFI is North America, so Canada and primarily Canada and the U.S. And then you have Forest Stewardship Council, which is a global system. So these are the three primary systems that are developed here in the U.S. Okay. You may hear something called the Program for the Endorsement of Forest Certification, PEFC. And this is a system that was developed. It's developed for use throughout the globe. It was initiated in Europe, but it's an international system. As the name implies, this Program for the Endorsement of Forest Certification, PEFC, endorses other forest certification systems. So they have a standard, and if your standard meets their standard, then they endorse you. And they've done this endorsement for American Tree Farm and SFI here in the U.S. So you may hear of PEFC, and that's what it is in a nutshell. Now, there's two ways to go about getting your forest certified. You can do it independently, or you can do it as part of a group. Okay. Now, independent certificate means that you have to go out and actually call the certification system and get them to come out and issue you a certificate, and you've got to carry all the costs and all that kind of thing. So the individual landowner bears the burden of the audit costs and that kind of thing. Now, there's a bullet here that says required by FSC for over 2,470 acres. Well, that's not true. FSC you can be a member of a group and of any size, doesn't really matter. And we'll talk about that 2,470 acres here in a minute relative to family forest and that kind of thing. So the other way, if you're not going to go out and get your own certificate, you're going to be a part of a group. Okay, and a good example of that is American Tree Farm. So American Tree Farm has state committees, and that's basically a group. So you have the Alabama State Committee of American Tree Farm and that kind of thing. And so if you're a tree farm member, you're a member of that group. So group certification, it means that you got an organization that runs the group. An individual forest owner joins that group, okay, and that distributes the cost of that certification amongst all the members in the group, so it makes it a little cheaper. And the group manager, that's the person, the organization that's running it, handles some of the issues for landowners. Okay. Now, if you were going to go out and get your own independent certificate, you'd have to have a written management plan, okay, and you'd have to develop a contract with a certifying body. So what is a certifying body? That's kind of an odd terminology. Well, the certifying body simply means that's your third party that is going to audit your forest. So in forest certification terms, and in forest and wood certification terms, certifying body refers to that third party auditor. SFI and American Tree Farm, for example, have hired PricewaterhouseCoopers as their independent third-party auditor. So they will hire PricewaterhouseCoopers to come into a third-party audit on their system. FSC has others, Rainforest Alliance, Scientific Certification Systems. So in certification lingo, those are called certifying bodies. So an individual that wants their own certificate has to go out, contract with a certifying body to come and do the audits on their property, and then they will be subject to an annual audit by your certifying body, and you have to pay an annual fee and all that kind of thing. So there's a lot of costs involved, of course, in doing all that. Now, group forest certification, which by the way is the way that most all woodland owners and family forest owners and small landowners get certified. NIPF owners get certified through a group. Well, you have to have a management plan, of course, you know, and most all the time this is developed by a qualified professional. There are other in the situation where that might not have to be, but typically it always is. So instead of contacting the certifying body, of course, you're just going to join the group. And that could be for free. Many states right now, being in the American Tree Farm System, being certified through them, doesn't cost anything. That may change in the future, and those discussions are going on. So there could be a small fee, or it could be for free. And the group manager will audit you periodically to make sure everybody in their group is doing what they're supposed to be doing. It's kind of an internal audit. And then occasionally, rare occasions in some big groups, you may wind up getting audited by the third-party auditor, which comes in annually and surveys the whole group. But because you're part of a group, the chances of you being subject to that audit are pretty minimal. So being a member of a group is a whole lot easier than and cost-wise a whole lot better than having your own independent certification. So virtually all family forests get certified through a group. You know, this reduces the cost significantly. Only periodic auditing is required, and the group manager handles some certification issues. So it works in everybody's favor, and that's largely how everybody gets certified. So all systems were designed, regardless whether the FSC or SFI, American Tree Farm, were designed to achieve sustainable use over the long run. I'll give you some examples of how the systems differ a little bit. And so we'll kind of contrast SFI and Tree Farm, which are very similar to FSC. FSC is more, if you read their standards, they're more aligned to environmental and social concerns. SFI and Tree Farm are much more forest practice related and operations related. And you can see that if you look at their standards and that kind of thing. Neither one is good or bad. It's just different in the emphasis that they have. FSC relies a whole lot, requires a whole lot of natural processes, natural regeneration, that kind of thing. You can certify plantation through FSC. You got to jump through a few more hoops. There's a few more things in the standard that you got to deal with. And SFI and Tree Farm allow for more intensive forestry practices, plantation, that kind of thing. So there's, again, this is a difference in the complexity and the nature of the organizations. So if you look at the SFI standards now, there's all these different bullets here. These are subject areas that underneath each one of these, if you will, they have things that have to be done to become certified under SFI. And then you can see there's, starting at the top, like forest management, and there's issues of forest productivity, and you have to maintain water quality. And if you read down through here, there's training and education and community participation. So SFI, in their standards, handles a number of these social issues and environmental issues and all that kind of thing. Okay. Well, American Tree Farm does the same thing. Of course, American Tree Farm is the most widespread system in the U.S. Instead of having those 20-some-odd bullets, American Tree Farm has 8. Use trained inspectors. Now, we call those tree farm inspectors. Well, in certification jargon, those are internal auditors. They're actually doing an audit of your property for the organization. So in certification terms, those are called auditors. Somebody likes to use the word auditor because it has bad connotations associated with it. And with Tree Farm now, there's third-party auditing in place. PricewaterhouseCoopers audits the tree farm system in the different regions and states in the U.S. To certify those tree farms in there. Of course, there's a cost associated with that. Here's the 8 bullets or subject areas that Tree Farm has standards under. Under these 8 standards, if you will, or these 8 subject areas, there's 23 indicators, 23 actual standards that you got to meet. And these are generally aligned with SFI. And they're protecting fish and wildlife and air quality, and you got to have reforestation going on and protecting special sites. So all those attributes of sustainability are associated with American Tree Farm. Where's FSC? FSC is global, of course, and you kind of see the hot spots where FSC forest certification is going on in the U.S. New England, Lake States, the West and California Pacific Northwest are the hotbeds of FSC certification here in the U.S., so is Europe and that kind of thing. The FSC has 10 principles and 138 indicators. So 138 standards that you have to hit, which is a lot bigger than American Tree Farm. And you notice the top 4 here I have in white, they're social standards. Tenure and use rights, indigenous people's rights, all those kind of things. And American Tree Farm doesn't have a lot of that. Well, the reason they don't is because American Tree Farm was written for here in the U.S. FSC was written to take care of global situations, and you have third world countries where there's some issues going on involving people's rights and that kind of thing, and they encompass those kind of things because they don't have laws in place to deal with them that are effective anyway, that they write those into these forest management standards. Therefore, they're tend to be more complex. And the FSC standards under current review right now, and there'll be some change in it. FSC has also regional provisions. There's different colored parts of the U.S. have different regional caveats or some things that are there that come into the FSC standard in the different regions, and SFI and Tree Farm don't have that. So let's do some contrast here, more local level, if you will. Let's contrast SFI and FSC just for a minute. SFI allows for clear cuts, 120 acres maximum. It can be larger if there's natural disturbance and that kind of thing. Where FSC has no complete clear cuts. Now, complete clear cuts, we mean everything, not commercial clear cut, but everything. No complete clear cuts in natural stands. Yeah, and there, if you're not going to clear cut, you have to maintain or retain some trees. So the retention has to be there to mimic natural disturbances. They do allow clear cutting in plantation situations. So there's a little difference there in how that's FSC and SFI handle clear cuts. What about chemicals? Well, SFI and Tree Farm do the same way. You follow the label. In the U.S., EPA has, you got all the chemicals are labeled, and you're expected to follow that label. Well, FSC has banned certain chemicals. Now, SFI has banned a few now as well, but FSC has a much larger list of banned chemicals. And you must show prudent use of them and a reduction in chemical use over time if it's appropriate. So there's a difference in the way they view the use of chemicals in the woods. What about plantations? We mentioned it earlier. SFI allows any man. I mean, there's a cap on size, but you can use plantations. You have to show prudent use of pesticides and that kind of things. And GMOs are allowed, and we don't do a lot of that now here in the U.S., but it's coming. Do allow genetically modified organisms. This is not tree breeding. This is not tree improvement, but this is actually where you've changed the DNA. You've actively directly changed the DNA of a tree. So GMOs are allowed. FSC, no new conversions. You can't take a natural forest stand. Generally speaking, you can't take a natural forest stand and turn it into here in the east, let's say you had an oak hickory forest, you can't turn it into a pine plantation. Okay? The plantations that were in effect before FSC got cranked up in 1949 are okay to have and manage. You have to use restricted pesticides. Local sources of seed can be used, no GMOs, that kind of thing. So you can manage plantation. If they've been in plantation culture, you can continue to manage it. You just can't take a natural forest and convert it to a plantation. So there are some differences in how you deal with plantations relative to FSC and SFI. Now, oddly enough, I guess, is a good way of putting it, FSC plantations do not equal artificially planted forest. Now, most of the time, when we think about plantation, we mean we're going to take a tree plant, we're going to plant trees in rows, whatever, or plant an area, and that's going to be a plantation. That's what we call plantation. However, FSC differentiates between what they call a plantation is something that's going to be put in, planted trees obviously, but short rotation, we're using a real intensive practice like bedding, mid-rotation herbicides, those kind of things, short rotation like a pulp rotation, 15, 17 years, something like that. However, if you put the same, let's use loblolly pine as an example, we put loblolly pine plantation in, what we call plantation in, and you allow it to go to saw timber rotation. You may be doing pulpwood thinnings, but you allow it to go to a 30, 35, 40-year rotation. You're not in there, you're not bedding, and you're not doing some of those real intensive planting practices. And if you're doing that, you're actually, if you're in the range of loblolly, you actually have what's called, FSC calls a semi-natural planted forest, and it's not a plantation. So you have to know these kind of things to be able to understand these standards. In this case, FSC, this is real important in the southeast U.S. Where pine planting, southern pine plantation, loblolly, and that kind of thing are real important. Many of those plantations aren't actually called plantations by FSC. So these caveats you have to understand. So just to give you an example here, let's take a tract. This is a topo map. Obviously, got a tract, got a stream running through it. The red line's a road. So this is a 32-acre little tract here in it's actual tract here in Kentucky. It's going to be logged, so you've got the log decks there in purple. You got primary skid trails laid out in red. You've got a streamside management zone that encompasses the B&P used to protect the stream. Everybody does that, of course, and so that's in place. Now, if we're going to use an SFI option, you could go in there and you could clear cut the entire thing. It's small. You leave your streamside management zone. Maybe you leave a little forested buffer there to buffer that from the road. And part of it's low productivity, so maybe you convert it to pine. So this would be a management regime that you could undertake with SFI. Now let's take that same piece of property and impose some FSC management on it. Everybody protects the stream, of course. And instead of clear cutting the whole thing, you're having to leave some retention. So they left individual trees scattered, maybe a 2H system. Maybe they kept some trees going up the drains and that kind of thing. And then you have the area that was poor productivity. Maybe you opened some patches up in there, but you certainly didn't clear cut that area and didn't put a plantation in. So this would be an FSC type option. So there's a difference there, and there's a cost to leaving some of that retention in place. Sometimes that retention means something dollar-wise, and sometimes it doesn't. Depends upon the individual site. So you get a little bit of difference in the contrast of the systems there. Okay. FSC does recognize that a big forest doing real intensive practices, a big forest ownership is under more constraints, if you will, or they recognize the fact there's more chance for an environmental issue associated with high intensity production compared to small ownerships or low intensity management. In the U.S. we have, the FSC standards have what's called family forest provisions. So if you're under that 2,470 acre mark, you can be managed under the family forest scenario, which requires you to do less monitoring, and it's a whole lot less problematic to become certified. And most FSC members in the East are smaller land. Well, the family forest is prevalent in the East, and there are these smaller ownerships get FSC certified. They can do that under the family forest provisions. For example, stewardship plans that are developed by a state agency or management plans developed by a state agency, oftentimes for free, can be used as a management plan that will generally be able for family forest owners to get certified through FSC. So FSC may seem a little onerous, and it can be for some real intensive situations, but generally speaking, for family forest owners, it's not a problem. And the woodland owners benefit from all this: access to potential wood markets through certification, improved management and assistance. We talked about that. Sometimes you get price premiums and those kind of things. So there are some benefits, obviously, for the woodland owner. And there's cost, time, and involvement with improving a plan. If you have a plan right now, it needs to be modified or something, it takes a little time to do that, And there are fees associated with certification. Right now, tree farm is free. FSC is usually going to cost you. There are some groups out there that provide some free membership fees, if you will, or no membership fees for FSC. A lot of times that's going to cost you a little bit of money. So there's a little bit of cost, a little bit of time, but for family forest owners, not too much. Generally, stewardship plans work, state agency-derived management plans work without having to mess with them too much. So ultimately, the first steps in certification, you contact, the way you get to do this is you contact your local state forestry agency. Your state forester works in your area, you know, can direct you to tree farm or FS. If there's an FSC group available in your area, they're going to know about that. They can direct you to it. So that's your best source of information. Oftentimes, industry foresters can assist, and that's especially true if they are, you know, if they're a company that's involved with certification. Industry foresters can direct you to it. You can contact American Tree Farm, SFI, and FSC directly. They all have websites. You can get in contact them, and they can ultimately get you the right person. The best source of information, although, is going to be your forester, your local foresters. Okay? And so I hope this provided you a little bit of a brief intro into certification. We're going to be dealing tomorrow with more details of this and how you get plugged into certification and how certification can work for you and the details of how that works. And so, today we did deal with the issues of the basic introduction into certification. So we might have some time for some questions now.
All right. Thank you, Jeff. So yeah, we're going to open up to questions. I'm also going to post a link to that webinar tomorrow at the same time. So I guess second of all, if everyone would put their mouse over the smiley face under their name, you just mouse over it there, and then you can select applause. Let's give him a digital round of applause. And while everyone is applauding, if you would start going ahead and typing your questions, we can start reading those out and thinking about getting them answered.
So the one question came in, and I'm sure this wasn't the first one, but does certification work for hardwoods or just conifers? Nope, works for everything. You know, it doesn't matter, hardwood, conifers, spruce, fir, it doesn't matter. Certification works in all forest types here in the U.S. No differentiation.
I see several people raising their hand. If you have a question, go ahead and just type it in the chat box, and then we'll make sure he gets it.
Yeah, and so there's you know, and when you do one of these presentations like this, it's hard to get, and the time frame that we've got, 40 minutes, it's really hard to get a lot of details in. And so you know, SFI has been independent, and I didn't mention that. So SFI started out as an industry system, so it was a second party, and SFI is now a separate organization. And so now that organization is independent of any ownership of land, so it's now a third-party organization. So SFI is a third-party organization, has third-party auditing as well. So there's some nuances and some details of that that's very difficult to try to get through in a short presentation. Okay, and you can get information on all this kind of stuff off the web. Okay, anyway. So, and these things are constantly changing as well, the standards and that kind of thing, and undergoing review. And SFI just finished, is in the process of finishing up a big review of their standards. Those standards will change things. FSC is under the same kind of thing. So I appreciate those kind of comments of clarification.
Okay, we got a few questions here. So Chuck asks, with pellet mills supplying European markets becoming more prevalent, what changes do you foresee in forest certification to meet their strict sustainability standards? Well,
ultimately, yeah, so the issue of the biomass and the pellets and all that kind of stuff kind of brings a new caveat to things, and ultimately a lot of that's being driven, obviously, particularly on the pellet end of things, being driven by Europe. So they have sustainability standards that have to be met in order to get government subsidies to use pellets there in Europe, particularly like the UK and Britain. And so a lot of times some of the certification standards, FSC for example, there are others, you know, and aspects of SFI and that kind of thing can provide to provide for sustainability or for recognition of sustainability associated with some of those demands from Europe. So certification becomes important, or can become important, in helping to satisfy the demands they have for sustainability issues associated with the pellet market. And that one is constantly there's a lot of interest in that, but it's it's kind of new and it's constantly changing. We're figuring out how to work through all that here in the U.S. Particularly important, obviously, in the Southeast, shipping pellets over to Europe. Predict the future. Will there be a price premium at some point? Well, so that's a good question. So ultimately, certification hasn't developed as quick as we thought it would, and those price premiums haven't developed as quick as some thought they would or expected they would. And that's well understood. There are price premiums for certain things in certain markets now, and we haven't talked about this here. It was outside the scope of this particular thing. We'll deal with it tomorrow. But there's different sectors of the forest industry that have different interests in certification. Railway ties, for example, nothing. I mean, there's no interest there at all. Pulp and paper, there is interest. Okay. In some instances, if there is if there's a lack of certified timberland and forest land in an area, and those mills are needing it, you'll get price premiums paid for pulpwood. You get price premiums paid for saw logs, that kind of thing. That does happen. Not everywhere, but it does. Secondary industries do get price premiums a lot of times as well. Most of the interest, though, is maintaining market share, which means maintaining customer. Customer wants certified material, you want to try to deliver it to them. So the price premiums are emerging, albeit it's slow, and I would say, in my opinion, it's fairly marginal at this time. It's a good question, though. What is the average time frame for getting certified through ATFS? I mean, that's pretty quick. So it's a matter of having a management plan. State forester comes out, does a stewardship plan, if you want to call it that, or management plan that they're going to deal with, and they can get you into the ATF system really fast. Some FSC groups, you can get certified very quickly there as well, especially if you're a family forest. That can happen pretty quick. So there's not a long time frame to get certified. Now, if your forester can't get out to you to do a plan for 5 months, well, that's a time lag. But once that plan is done, it's easy to get you in the system. So which states have the highest rates of written plans and forest certification in IPF? So of course, it depends on whether you're talking about American Tree Farm or FSC. So what are we talking about? All right, so that makes a difference. So states that have a lot of active forestry going on in them now. So that's the wood basket. So you can take your Georgias and Alabamas, Louisiana, all that kind of thing. You're going to have a higher number and percentage of your forest land that's in American Tree Farm right now that's certified than you do in areas outside of that. So it's going to be directly related in this regards. It'll be directly related in how much activity in the forest industry there is. Those statistics, it's hard to find a map somewhere that you can go to online and says, oh, this is percentage, this state's this percentage certified forest stuff. Those studies have been done. We've got the data here at the University of Kentucky. Chris Reeves manages that, and he's involved with, he's an extension specialist, an extension associate involved with the certification here, and he keeps those kind of statistics. So a lot of those aren't available, but if you think about American Tree Farm, it's going to be happening where forest industry is big and going on. Okay. So what are the common obstacles or hurdles to being certified for small acres and landowners? Well, I mean, the biggest one is the fact is it can be the cost, particularly for FSC. Now, for ATFS, it's not a big thing. American Tree Farm, it's not a big deal. FSC, there can be some obstacles there for smaller landowners, but that's why the group was developed. If you've got a group, if you have a group operating in an area, then your ability to participate in FSC is much greater than if it's not. Because if it's not, you can't afford the $2,000 or $3,000 a year to keep your forest certified. And hardly nobody's going to do that. So you got to have a group operating. If you've got a group operating, it's not a big deal. There's a question here about how much do forest management practices change once the forest owner joins the certification scheme, especially those already reserving BMPs in their states, that kind of thing. So the bottom line there is, if you're a family forest owner and you're not involved in doing something that's highly intensive, So you're not out there clearing land, and you're not out there bedding and fertilizing and spraying herbicides every 3 years and that kind of thing. And you're planting loblolly pine, for example, or you're managing a hardwood stand, and you're letting that loblolly plantation grow to saw timber. The changes for family forest owners, the changes in what you do on the ground is not that big of a deal. It's really not. It becomes more important to companies that are using really high intensity type of operations like I've described. In those kind of situations, then you have allowable cut issues, you have the intensity of practice issues. That becomes a little bit more of a challenge. But for family forest owners, most of them, you're not going to have that much change in your actual management strategy. What you're doing is good, and you're going to be certified that in fact you are doing it. If that makes any sense. Yes, for someone who says no one can tell them what and how to do things on their land, how do you convince them of the benefits of certification without any price benefit? Yeah, well, good luck with that one. So, so the bottom line is, if you're predisposed to, you don't want to deal with anything, you don't want anybody telling you what to do, and you want to manage however you want to manage. You're not going to be able to talk them out of that, especially without a price premium. So without the price premium driving the system, people aren't going to change a lot. So what causes behavior change? Something has to be motivating them to do it, and of course dollars is one of those things. So having that price premium available to you, or other considerations of industry, and this can happen. There could be things other than price, but translated into dollars somehow or another. That's going to be the big motivating factor for most, not for everybody, but for most people. And without that, some landowners won't change. We have had landowners that have become certified, that have never cut timber, and become certified because of the oversight that certification provides them. They feel more comfortable with harvesting timber. Now that may seem strange to somebody that's in the pine belt and dealing with pine plantations and management, because our timber harvest is common down there. But in hardwood territory, we've got landowners that are very skittish about forestry operations. The certification provides them a degree of protection or assurances that everything's going to be done right. So there are people that do get certified for those reasons that aren't necessarily monetary. But let's face it, the dollar drives most decisions. These are really good questions.
All right, just in the interest of time, while we're waiting for any more questions to come in, I'm going to go ahead and push out the survey for those that are interested in receiving CEUs. So hold on just a moment, and it should open up in a separate browser window.
Says artificial or artificial regenerating can be used for FSC, natural forest management. And that's absolutely true. It can be. You just can't go converting. You can't go converting natural forest into a plantation. So that's not gonna that's going to be difficult to handle. But yes, artificial regeneration can be used. It's done in the right way.
All right, we got another question in. In forestry certification, certifiers do not tell you what to do or how to do it. They find where you conform or do not. That's not so much question. It is up to the manager to find a fix that works.
Absolutely. So you have the standards, and it's up to the forest manager, landowner, whatever, to figure out ways to beat the standard. So the all standards right now that we deal with are not going to say, oh, you must do this practice. They're going to say you must meet this standard. And the landowner has the ability to figure out, or the forester has a way to figure out how to do that. And oftentimes, there's lots of different ways to skin a cat, and that's true in forest certification and land management. So you have a lot of freedoms. You do have to meet the standards. You have to use BMPs to protect water quality. It doesn't say which ones you have to use or exactly how they have to be implemented properly, but you have your choice of what you do, for example. That's a good example. So the person that typed that question in is totally correct about that. You do have flexibility.
Looks like we've got a few more folks typing here, so we'll give the opportunity to answer some questions.
One question is, are there any special provision for longleaf pine planting? No, they're not. One thing that you can do is, like, for example, a lot of longleaf pine, you might be planting it like it's a restoration activity, right? You're actually restoring a natural system. So from that standpoint, you know, obviously SFI or tree farmer has no problem with a longleaf pine planting at all. From FSC's perspective, if you're doing it from the standpoint to put in to restore longleaf pine habitat, that's a restoration planting. Okay, it's not a plantation out there to produce pulpwood with, generally speaking. So I mean, that wouldn't be an issue at all there. So longleaf pine, the longleaf pine management in the South. I mean, there's a lot of things you could do there, and you have a lot of flexibility in that. They're all good questions. I'm reading. There's somebody wrote a question. It's a long question here, dealing with pine plantation in the South. Let me read this real quick, and then I'll try to respond to it if I can. Yeah, so somebody wrote in about the issue of family forest owners in the South managing pine plantations, and they would argue with me that FSC is not favorable for them. So now we have a disagreement about, you know, what's favorable, what's not favorable, that kind of thing. So there are provisions in the FSC standard that would preclude the use of certain chemicals, for example. And one I can think of would be Velpar, right? So there are some provisions there that would affect, that could affect management. Normally there's routes around them. We manage a group up here, the Center for Forest and Wood Certification, and we have loblolly pine plantation owners, loblolly pine plantation owners in our group, FSC group. We dual certify everything, American Tree Farm and FSC, generally speaking. So we have dual certification. We certify for both standards. And those are landowners that have loblolly pine growing, have a saw timber rotation ongoing. And so I would say it would depend upon I'm not arguing with the person that wrote this in, provide this comment, because it could cause you some issues in certain situations, okay, but certainly not all. Okay, so it depends upon your individual situation.
Got a new question in. Relative to the example on longleaf just mentioned, it seems that motive matters depending on the certification system. Planting is fine if you're doing restoration, but it's not fine if you'd like to make a living from the wood products.
Yeah, so if sort of yes and sort of no, I mean, the person has it right from the standpoint, you know, it does matter whether you're restoring it, or you're doing something like that. Yeah, it does. It would make a difference to you. Like I said, if you've got plantations already in and you're managing short rotation, pulpwood rotation, so 17-year rotation, 20, whatever, real intensive and everything, you can do that under FSC. There are provisions though that you have to deal with, and some of those are going to be a requirement, a certain amount of land base to go back to natural systems. Now that can kick you out of the certification game with them. So under certain situations with plantation management, the standards could be such that it causes difficulty for you. That could be the case. Okay, there are people making money on FSC managed pine plantations, and that is true. So it kind of depends on your individual situation, I guess. And I think my point is a lot of and what's coming through here, and this is not a lot of questions coming in are not atypical questions for this, particularly for the South, because you know, the issue of FSC and natural systems, in a way, does seem counterintuitive as how that might work in the South with pine plantation. And I'm not saying it works in all situations, but I'm also saying that just because you're growing loblolly pine in plantations doesn't mean you run away from FSC. That's certainly not the case. Okay, but it could affect you, and that's why you have to work out that situation with your forester. Can tell you whether it works for you or not. It very well may not work for you, and that's fine. So you got to find out the certification system that works for you, makes sense for you to use, where you can get a benefit from it, and if those things work out, you make a business decision. If it doesn't work for you, you don't.
So in the interest of time, we're going to go ahead and start shutting down. If there are any remaining questions, I'm going to go ahead and post my email address in the chat box below, and you can just get that question to me, and I'll make sure to forward it on. Thank you for everybody that showed up today. Appreciate it. And remember, we have a sister presentation tomorrow at the same time, 12 p.m. Central, 1 p.m. Eastern. Thank you, everybody.